this community meeting to review select topics of the proposed zoning bylaw. So the meeting tonight will be run and overseen by our planning department, and they're with us this evening. So I'm going to introduce them. We have Andrew Allen, Director of Planning and Development, Ian Hall, Development Planning Manager, Marina Stepovic, Community Planner, Sven Koberwitz, Planner, and Floria Boll, Recording Secretary. And Floria is handling all the logistics behind the scenes. So also attending this evening are some of our councillors, just to listen to what you have to say and the input that you're giving us. With us this evening are Councillor Eric Scott, Councillor Brenda Rowe, Councillor Alton Toth, Councillor Janice Kuster, and Councillors Tom Lamb and Matt McLean may also be joining us later on. So that's it for me. I'm going to turn you over to Andrew Allen to manage the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Seegers. That's excellent. Thank you very much, everyone who's attending this evening. It looks like over on our attendee list, we have 43 attendees. So that's excellent. When scheduling this meeting, we truly weren't sure if we would have 7 or 75 people. So we're thrilled to have as many folks as we do. So basically how tonight's going to work here, we've got an hour. I'll be crisp and quick. I've got a brief presentation to describe our efforts to renew the District of Sechelt zoning bylaw. So the District of Sechelt does have a zoning bylaw in place, zoning bylaw number 25. We've had it in place since the mid-1980s, and it's been amended hundreds of times, and it's time to move on, refresh, modernize. So basically what we're doing is creating a new draft of a zoning bylaw that's going to bring us into the modern world, respecting regulation and so forth. And we intend on bringing it in line with our official community plan. So I'll have a brief presentation. I'll just pull up screen share now and we'll go through that. At the end of my presentation, we will outline how you can communicate with us by a Q&A, or we can bump you up into the panelists for questions and so forth. So we'll get to that part shortly. So bear with me here for one moment. Okay, I assume everyone can see that, and I will carry on accordingly. You'll note our email address, planning@sechelt.ca. If you have lingering thoughts and questions after this meeting, please do send us an email there. We receive them all, we categorize them, we use them, we respond, we use them to build better zoning policy. So I'm going to go through some topic areas tonight. We've selected these topic areas because this is what we deal with folks from the public every day. These are the kind of calls, emails, permit applications we get. We're happy to talk about how you define grade and height of a building. And if you're a designer, an architect, an engineer, that might make more sense to you. But we're not going to get into that level of technical piece here. But basically anything zoning related is up for discussion ultimately through this process. So what we're doing here in 2020, we've been working on engagement. Really since September, we've been doing surveys, advertisements and whatnot, building a base of local knowledge for how we can improve our zoning bylaw. We're beginning to put a draft in place, and starting in next year in 2021, we're going to put this draft, make it public, share it with council, share it with the community, with a goal in mind of adopting it. And it'll be known as Zoning Bylaw 580. So basically, let's start from scratch here. Like, what is a zoning bylaw? The District of Sechelt has a vision, an overarching multi-year, multi-generational vision. We have an official community plan. And really that's where it starts. The official community plan and the vision outline, how do we see Sechelt unfolding in the decades? What's our goal for the downtown? How do we look at neighborhoods and densities and land uses? But then when you get down to it, the zoning bylaw really is the implementation tool. It's the nuts and bolts. It's the how much, the how, where, you know, the questions. So every municipality has a zoning bylaw, some more than one, and they're really the key tool for managing land use, growth, development. And they're meant to reflect the community values, and that comes from the OCP and the vision. And neighborhood identity. I mean, we can recognize that downtown Sechelt has a different feel than Sandy Hook, which has a different feel than West Sechelt. And we have zones that recognize this accordingly. Some apply to one property, some apply to the whole neighborhood. But it's a regulatory tool. It implements the OCP and moves us forward. And I'll say the OCP, that rolls off my tongue, is common language. That's the official community plan. So here on the right-hand side of my screen, you'll just see a snippet of what a zoning bylaw map looks like. So there's different zones that apply to different properties. And we use commonly accepted color coding, yellow being residential, darker versions of yellow moving into orange are higher density areas. Red, various color shades of red are commercial. And so here's the downtown core, Sechelt and our surrounding village neighborhood, showing what the zoning map looks like and how we categorize different properties. So why do a zoning bylaw update? It's noted that the bylaw dates back to 1987. It's tangled and twisted, and there's lots of areas that are confused, and we intend on cleaning that up and really simplifying our approach and providing better regulation. And really getting up to speed with modern land use practices, coordinating with our OCP. Some may say the OCP is old already. It was adopted in 2011, but our zoning bylaw has yet to catch up to it. And I think everybody can see there's a need to manage growth. There's a lot of growth happening in Sechelt. Real estate market's very busy, very hot right now. There's also opportunities. There's economic development opportunities, be it mixed use buildings in our downtown core, be it laneway suites, bedroom suites, home-based businesses. There's lots of areas where zoning can encourage and support. Agricultural land reserve being a key area. At present, we have a rural residential zoning that does not highlight the agricultural potential in the agricultural land reserve properties. And so here are the 5 areas. We've recently done a survey. It was open for a couple of months, and we had different surveys because we know there's a lot of people particularly interested in short-term rentals. And that was seen, the numbers were 3-4 times higher than the feedback we got on urban agriculture, for example. And that's great. We want feedback on all of these topics. And we recognize that some people did all 5 and other people maybe did 1 or 2. But so home-based business, the density, residential infill, we call it, short-term rental, agricultural land reserve uses, as well as urban agriculture. So those are our 5 topic areas. I'll go through those briefly here ahead of our discussion. So first one being home-based business. So what can we look to regulate in home-based business? How do we support this? I mean, there are businesses in residential areas. Many of them are largely accepted. Some of them you might not know even exist. But we want to maintain the expectations of residential neighborhoods. So we can look at potentially regulating maximum number of employees that you can have. Can you have people who don't live in your home working there? Size of property. You might see more uses on a rural property than you would on an urban property, for example, in a residential area. Categories based on property size. The larger your property, the more opportunities and so forth. Operating hours. Want to know if it's consistent with our noise bylaw. And we can even nail it down into specific uses. Accounting, music, yoga, hairdresser. There's so many options here. And I say music is a prime example. It's long been accepted that a piano teacher can teach a student. But what does that mean for band practice or for rock and roll and whatnot? And we truly have seen these types of examples in Sechelt. And there's a lot of question about uses that draw a crowd, draw a number of clients at the same time. And is that acceptable in residential? The density question. How do we maximize our efforts here? Do we include maximum house sizes, more support for laneways and suites? The building code's evolving. You can now have a duplex with a suite, according to the BC building code. So there's 4 units in one duplex. Our zoning doesn't have that at this point, but it's something we're certainly willing to consider in appropriate locations. And do we need lot size minimums to qualify for a second dwelling and so forth? So these are key questions that we are analyzing. We research other bylaws, we take feedback from folks. Urban agriculture. I think in the feedback we hear is, hey, people should be able to grow their own food. Absolutely. Question then is, can you sell your food to your neighbors, to the general public? What does that mean for parking and traffic and roadside stands? What does that mean for the types of animals? okay to have a rooster in a residential zone, for example? How do we deal with wildlife or pests and rodents and so forth? Some of that's a little bit beyond the zoning, but nonetheless, it's something that we want to factor into our decision-making process. Agricultural land reserve, and I've noted this off the top. At present, we have a zone at RR2, which means rural residential. We want to propose to create a zone that's called agriculture. You know, we have a few areas of agriculture in Sechelt, like Tyson Road being a prime example, Mason Road, the upper side of Mason Road, Norwest Bay Road. There's agricultural land reserve properties that are being used for agriculture, and that should be celebrated and supported in Sechelt, and we should find a way to enhance our production. And the Provincial Agricultural Land Commission has their own regulations. We can use their regulations, we can further regulate, but there are certain areas where one has a right to farm within the ALR. And there's a whole range of permitted uses within there, ranging from, in some cases, cannabis production, in other cases, alcohol production, wineries and cideries, even breweries, agritourism and events and housing, size of house, the size of the total amount of land you can use for a house. These will all be considerations for us. Now, short-term rentals. I can say we recognize this is a big issue. Coming out of the summer, we've received a lot of feedback, either directed to staff, directed to council, directed to our bylaw enforcement. We get it. It's a difficult one to determine. The preliminary results from the survey, as expected, show a real divide, a real split. There's some people who wholeheartedly support and agree with short-term rentals. And there's other folks who say, look, this is a residential neighborhood. I shouldn't be kept up at night by a party house. And we understand that and can feel some empathy for that. And some of us ourselves are affected. So where can we make gains in this? Some of this may come separately in a short-term rental bylaw, but nonetheless, where can we make gains? Do we want to identify the maximum number of guests? Do we want to identify how many rental units can be on a property, or the requirement for an on-site operator? So I stress that no decisions have been made yet on this regard. There's a lot to think about, and there's no real clear right answer on this one. And so it's not just a challenge for District of Sechelt, not even just for the town of Gibsons or regional district. This is a huge challenge for municipalities all over the place. So it's a tough one, and we're not sure yet where that right answer lies. We'll review the feedback we received to date. Happy to talk about it tonight. And ultimately, we're going to create some regulations that we propose in the zoning bylaw, and we will show that to council, show that to the community, and see where we can come to a resolution. So that's the end of my brief presentation. So we're at this point now where we'd like to hear from you folks. It is a little bit difficult. We acknowledge electronic meetings are what we're doing. It's the only way we can do this. But we'd like to hear from you folks. So there's a couple things. If anybody has phoned in, you can press *9 to raise your hand. If anybody would like to speak, who's presently an attendee, you can raise your hand and we'll promote you into a panelist, whereupon you can speak. You will feel a momentary sense of disconnection as you get transferred over, but you can certainly do that. The other option here is we have the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. You can type in, I see there's one question in there now. You can type in an answer to the Q&A. We can read it out loud. We can type an answer and describe our answer as well. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. So I would encourage folks to raise your hand if you're in the attendee gallery and you'd like to ask a question or make a statement, and we can go from there. So I do have one question here from John McDougall-Goulet. It says, does the district have authority to implement an empty home tax? So that's a tough one. I would suggest at this point, I believe the answer is no. That was something that was brought in by the province. The province determines those types of endeavors and passes on authorities to some municipalities. And I recall when that came through some time ago, it did not apply to the Sunshine Coast. And John further notes that this would be beneficial, including possibly minimizing the effect on Airbnbs. And something we can look into, but can't say we immediately have the authority to do anything about that at this point. Okay, I see a raised hand from a call-in listener. We will have Floria Bowl, our recording secretary here, promote you in. Thank you. There we go. Okay, hello?
Oh, hello, Council. My name is Tracy Jackson. I'm a homeowner in Sechelt. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I am interested in the topic of short-term rentals. We have recently purchased a property in Sechelt, and we have been operating short-term rentals elsewhere in the US and Canada for over 9 years, successfully and without any difficulties. And what I'm most interested in is, obviously, I would like to participate in the process as much as I possibly can, mostly because of the experience that we've had. I'm also a practicing lawyer, so it's, I'm comfortable with legislation and interpreting bylaws and that sort of thing. And I'm wondering if there's any possibility for me to be involved in some kind of a capacity. I know in the desert, for example, they set up a committee, and we were liaising very frequently with city council there. That's the kind of involvement I'd like to have if I possibly could, because I think we have a understanding of the community interest. We also are homeowners, and we reside in a residential area and certainly don't want to be disturbed. So we have some experience on sort of what is a reasonable balance of all of those interests, and certainly have a lot of ideas about how Sechelt could the way in which it could go, so that there could be a recognition of the residents and not wanting to be exposed to noise, as was mentioned, but on the other hand, also allowing for the overall businesses in Sechelt to benefit from having tourists and persons coming into this community to stay.
Well, to answer the earlier question about like an advisory group or panel that could help assist with short-term rentals, that's
yes,
certainly,
yes.
Yeah, it's certainly a possibility. What we're going to do, and hopefully in January, is report back to council on what we've heard through our engagement process this fall and make recommendations on how we can move forward. We have exchanged emails with other folks from Sunshine Coast, operators of short-term rentals, and expressed some willingness to work together. Okay, and we're willing to do that, work with neighbors who feel negatively impacted by short-term rentals as well. So we're trying to, where we can, find the appropriate middle ground.
Right. So is there a mechanism to, I don't know, just sort of put my name forward or something like that, so that I could potentially participate in a greater capacity?
Yes, the first step would be to send us an email at the planning@sechelt.ca address, and then we can then get your contact. And we're starting to build a list as well. Yeah. So I don't know what the next step.
Okay.
But there's a mechanism to contact us to get your name involved. We'll start from there if that works.
Okay, I appreciate that. I don't know how to then end my communication here. Am I supposed to push something? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Where I'd like to continue to listen, but of course I don't need to talk anymore. I want to leave the floor open for other people. How do I do that?
I think we would then move you back from your present position as a panelist over to attendee.
Okay. Thank you
Yeah.
very much. I appreciate you
Hang tight
taking the
for now.
time to listen. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. Okay, and if that works out, Floria, perhaps you could promote Sechelt Pilates into the panelists. Okay, Sechelt Pilates, are you there? Hello, we can see your profile picture. Oh, connecting to audio. Here we go. I'm being impatient. Okay, Sechelt Pilates, it seems as though you're connected to audio but muted. If you're able to unmute, there you go.
Andrew, can you hear me now?
Yes. It's a bit echoey. Are there two connections?
No, it was just the audio on speaker, so I can turn it up.
Oh, okay.
I'll turn that
Yeah.
off. Sorry, it's Ryan here with Jessica Zentner. I had a couple questions, being these bylaws, with whether they're agriculture, the short-term rental, and other little laws are going. Are you guys going to be making these decisions based on how residents can actually earn income with their businesses and their home businesses, rather than complaint-driven bylaw change like we've seen in the past? Because that's a real concern with that. Some of this stuff is complaint-driven, but then it affects people's ability to earn on the Sunshine Coast, where there's a lot of people who are relying on this income and these ways to earn to stay and live here in our community.
Oops. I lost my screen. One moment.
And then part two of the question is, some of these short-term rentals, they do pay business fees and short-term rental fees to the district. Do we know what cost it would affect Sechelt if we were to remove the short-term rental, and what income would not be generated any further, which then would rely on taxpayers to cover those gaps?
That's a good question. I don't have that level of data with me this evening, but that's something worth thinking about for sure. I mean, we do issue business licenses. I think perhaps there's a benefit to the community as a whole, but the district of Sechelt charges the business licenses, but doesn't specifically bring in revenue from short-term rentals. To your first question, what we're trying to do is provide some regulation that allows for clarity on home occupations. I think we receive complaints, we investigate. A complaint does not immediately lead to enforcement, but does lead to investigation. I think what a source of frustration for everyone, from our bylaw officers to neighbors to operators of businesses, is sometimes, where is that line? What is the level of acceptability? And how do we deal with that? I mean, there's enforcement through fines, but really our first preference would be enforcement through education. And in some cases, business owners just aren't quite sure what they're permitted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And we would like to provide some more clarity, ultimately, wherever that line may end up.
Right. So I think it'd be interesting with the short-term rental, especially and business, the businesses that run from home, before we start restricting them, and maybe giving, like you say, they pay the business fees every year, which is income generating, right? Which does go into the budget, correct?
Yeah, we project our business license revenue, for example, and make calculations based on those assumptions.
Right. And then on top of that, so the home businesses, I mean, trying to promote those home businesses and letting people earn money would be a bonus to the community and a bonus to the taxpayers, because they would generate the income for the business license, allow the people to earn income. On top of the short-term rental thing too as well, reducing those without providing hotels and other things that are being built to offset those could reduce tourism, which would then store owners in Sechelt front store owners and so et cetera are struggling already. They're losing tourism dollars, you know, and those tourism dollars are pretty important to the Sunshine Coast. These are all fears that I see from what changes can come from this, from zoning, the zoning bylaws.
Mhm.
But anyway, that's all I have.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Ray. We're not trying to necessarily take a hard stance at this point. We're trying to gather some input and see where we should go and present that to council. But noting, I think clarity ultimately is what we're seeking.
Right, and I'll add myself to that group too, because I want to be a part of some of this planning. So I'll email you as well.
Okay. Yeah, planning@sechelt.ca. Great.
Okay.
So we have.
You can come.
Thanks, Ray. Pardon me? Okay, thank you. We've got a couple more hands up. We have staff attempting to answer questions in the Q&A. Looks like we've got lots of interest, which is great. So Floria, could you please enable Greg Bellamy to speak? Hi, Greg.
Good evening. Are you able to hear me?
Yes. Hi.
We're short-term operators in Davis Bay and have been for about 3 or 4 years now with 0 complaints and no issues, not a neighbor speaking to it. So I'm trying to understand, you know, I've understood that there are some party houses around, but their concern is that it seems like we should be able to address some of the issues that seem to me like they're probably relatively isolated issues. And we have to be careful not to be too broad with regulation that knocks out the activities like the businesses we're operating, where we think we're really drawing a great clientele of people who are enjoying the area and contributing. So I'd be curious to know how the district is able to try to target the efforts to not eliminate the possibility of short-term rentals, like in the case of neighbors like Tuanek, where a lot of them are individual cottages. A on-site operator or on-site even person would be nearly impossible in single unit B&B operations.
Well, it seems to me that the presence of on-site operator or the presence of nearby operator is probably an area for further exploration. I'm not aware that we get many, if any, complaints about B&Bs that are operated by one living on site. I think that the bulk of our complaints come from the party house, the off coast, in many cases, owner who's not available for neighbors to contact, hard for us to contact later on, and so forth. So that's probably an area to start. But we will look at all options. The province has put out a short-term rental toolbook. We look at what other local governments have done. I see there was a question in the Q&A about consistency on the coast. I see the regional district has amended their zoning bylaw to speak to short-term rentals. Gibson's is working on theirs. So there's some opportunity for synergy there as well. But I will again say, I don't believe the intent here is to set out to close down bed and breakfast. But it's at the same time, it's difficult ultimately when we're being asked through complaints to regulate and manage behavior, right? Where a zoning bylaw regulates land use, and that's where it's a bit tricky for us.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I think the nearby operator makes sense, having one of the questions related to registry, so people could have ways of contacting, so you can make it easier for neighbors to be able to have an offline conversation with operators and try to work through these issues without it having to become a complaint process.
Yeah.
But I think the specific on-site seems very onerous to an awful lot of operators that I know. But nearby, visible, registered, we have a business license, we're insured for the operation, and we're here to listen to try to improve if there's anything that isn't helping the town and our neighbors. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Greg. Okay, it looks like John McDougall Goulet is up.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. So I have a question regarding suites in homes, secondary suites. I obviously we recognize the rental shortage is an issue in the district, all over the Sunshine Coast. I'm wondering if there will be consideration given to what might be viewed as excess regulation being an impediment to more people putting a secondary suite in their home. If I can use a personal example, my parents moved into a 3,500 square foot home in the Shores, and they weren't using their lower level. And I had recommended, and this is now 8 years ago, they consider having a suite put in. You know, probably the cost of putting in a kitchenette for 15 grand would have covered it. When they spoke with a contractor in the district of Sechelt, you know, necessitated separating heating systems, tearing studs back to walls. And it was, at the time, it was $80,000. I think it would be closer to 120 now. For what at the time probably would have rented for $1,000, it didn't make sense, so they didn't do it. Needless to say, this space sits empty. I think they're probably representative of a number of other people with homes that we could be assisting in this housing crisis by still having safe regulations, but not as onerous as some of them currently are. So I'm just wondering if there might be an opportunity to consider having what in the past, I guess, has been called an in-law suite, being able to be legally rented rather than having to go to the full extent of a legal secondary suite.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, John. I think that's where we get into the interface of the zoning bylaw and the BC Building Code. And I think when you start getting to fire separations and separate heating systems, the code is almost looking at these as separate entities entirely.
Yeah.
And life safety becomes, you know, and becomes the priority, and the ability to get out of a building should it catch on fire and so forth. And that's where the challenges relating to affordability can lie, particularly when you get into a duplex model with full fire separations and so forth, right? So,
right.
Yeah. So the zoning bylaw does permit suites in every dwelling right now, but we're certainly aware that not all suites have been legitimized through building permits and so forth, you know, likely due to cost.
Right. Well, for myself, actually, personally, not my parents' story, but we've just finished building a new house last year we moved into, and we are having a legal secondary suite just finalized now. So I am aware of the costs associated with that, of course. But I certainly understand the concern about safety with this fire separation. However, I guess the point that if a family member, an in-law, a mother-in-law or whatnot, could live in a suite, if they're at as great a risk as a tenant, theoretically. So that's why I'm saying I think that I don't see the distinction between it being a greater risk for a tenant needing fire separation when it wasn't necessary for this family member.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, just food for thought.
Yeah, interesting point. I appreciate that. Thanks, John.
Okay, thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, so again, we have staff trying to keep up to the questions in the Q&A. We'll go through the folks with the hands up at the moment, and if we get a chance to circle back and read some of the Q&A questions out loud, we'll certainly happy to do that as well. So next up, speaker with a hand up would be Brandon.
Yeah, hi there.
Hi.
My name is Brandon, and I'm an owner of an Airbnb in Wilson Creek. I've been operating the Airbnb for 3 years, and I haven't had a single problem with my rental. It's been actually a great experience for me. it's afforded me the ability to add, capital to my home, improve the property value of my home by making the guest experience better and better all the time. I invest a lot of the earnings from my Airbnb back into the property. So it's been a really great venture. The revenue from my home or from the venture goes directly back into the local economy, with steady flow of guests visiting cafes and restaurants in the nearby area. Not to mention about $15,000 a year is paid out in cleaning fees, which is just more money concentrated into the local economy. Similar to Greg, I feel like an on-site operator requirement doesn't seem reasonable given the nature of my rental. And being an Airbnb owner, I've come to understand the nature of Airbnb marketplace. Each rental suite's different. Each rental rentals really fluctuate in what they offer guests, and each rental attracts different types of clientele. It's difficult to broad brush stroke classifying Airbnbs and regulating guest numbers. Limiting number of rental nights, these types of things, those I can see how maybe that might be a solution for some Airbnbs, but it would only fix isolated problem party houses, and the effects on other non-problem Airbnbs would be that you end up destroying the efforts of Airbnb entrepreneurs who are investing lots of capital into their operations in order to make the tourist experience an exceptional one for visitors to the coast. So that being said, I just wanted to make sure that I articulated my thoughts on the subject. I believe regulation is probably important and it should happen, but I think it needs to be light, and I think it primarily needs to be complaints driven. So if there is a problem party house, nearby residents should have the ability to bring that up with bylaw officers, and that should be dealt with context by context. I don't feel like it serves any benefit to create a regulation that's going to affect my business, which has been nothing but a positive force in the community since it started.
Sure, fair enough. I'll pose a question. What do you think about maximum number of guests as a regulation?
Okay, so I have a maximum limit to the number of guests that can stay in my house, and it's dictated by the size of the house.
Right.
So I don't want to deal. I personally, as an Airbnb owner, don't want parties in my house. It breaks things. So I'm restricting. I don't want to attract that type of clientele. My Airbnb isn't that style of Airbnb. It's a quiet escape. Well, I try to make it a quiet escape. It's near the highway, but it's another issue. It's a quiet escape for, ideally a couple. And if they want to bring, if they want to have a guest over, it can possibly sleep four, but it's really, really tight because it's only, a 700 square foot space. So for me, you don't have to limit me because I'm already limiting myself. And, there is no way for you to rent more than, 4 people in that particular site. So again, like you can't broad brush stroking with one regulation that attempts to, make everyone conform. I don't see how that can work. If there's problems with Airbnbs in local communities, the neighbors should have the ability to complain, and then the bylaw officer should have the ability to take it up with that owner and issue tickets.
Okay, yeah, I hear you, and thank you. We appreciate your input.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, we have one more attendee with her hand up. W. Plimmer.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, hello, hi.
Hi. I've got a couple of things I wanted to go through here. One thing, I think we needed a hell of a lot more than 1 hour for this.
You bet. We can carry on.
Anyway, You mentioned that the bylaw is outdated from when it was written in the 80s, 1987, I believe. But you also said it's been updated many times and said to be multi-generational. It has evolved over time, but I think everybody agrees we need a new date stamp on it and have the whole thing reworked. So I applaud those efforts. We have some issues in our neighborhood concerning density. There's a project on Bly Road that has been zoned from R3 and it's going to be R1. There are several trailers in there with workers. Calls to the bylaw have fallen on deaf ears. We've had many problems at that area. Police have attended dozens of times. They're very familiar with the property. We've had prostitutes. We've had drug dealers parking at the mailboxes and up the street waiting for the residents there to walk up to get their drugs. We've dealt with sewage smells. I think about a month ago, we had an overdose death. So bylaws are great, but they got to be acted on. One time, the bylaw was called, and he spoke to one of the people in the trailer, and he was given the excuse that, oh no, it's only one trailer that's occupied, and he drove away quite happy. You only have to drive by at night to see all the lights on all the trailers. But anyway, I have a question. The mayor has talked about the major or the mini boom that's happening next year. There are many projects. The 5-story Lions project at Greencourt, the 6-story housing project on Inlet, the 5-story building project at the corner of Ebtine and Wharf. 2 developments in the works for Davis Bay. There's a huge development in Wilson Creek. There is the major project through Grand Excelsior Investments west of Wakefield, and a developer has also purchased land downtown to build a 4 or 5-story structure. High density needs to be in a certain area, and we've been dealing with a project on Mills Road. But I'm not going to get into the details of it. But I do have a question, and I'm asking how much importance and weight does the District of Sechelt place on the Advisory Planning Commission when they make comments on any one project? And I'll tell you why I'm asking is because the project on Mills Road, last night there was a public information meeting held by the developer. He denied that the Planning Commission had made any negative comments, when in fact there were several, and I just want to touch on some of them. These are comments made by the APC. History has not shown that this doesn't work in West Sechelt. These housing types don't sell in West Sechelt, and they may have a tough time with neighbors. This project is not appropriate for the area. Density is too great and needs to be transitioned. Placing these units in a neighborhood such as this is far too much in the immediate community. That's my question. How much importance is placed on those comments in lieu of the mini boom that's happening? I mean, there's projects all over town, and yet we're trying to cram this high density project into Mills Road.
Yeah, to answer your question, certainly we place large value in our Advisory Planning Commission. They are committed volunteers. They volunteer to spend time with us once a month. They provide recommendations. There's a high level of expertise on that group. There's landscape architects, residential designers, home builders, retired lawyer, and so forth. There's a real large cross-section of expertise on that group, and we well and truly do take into account their comments. the particular application, and I'm happy to have this conversation further offline as well, but that particular application has not yet been to council since we've had these comments from the APC, and we'll be working on a report for next month or the month after, and I can say we certainly will in the report reflect comments from both APC and the neighborhood.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
You betcha. Okay, so I've seen one comment just there, and I've seen some written comments about an hour not being quite enough. I'm happy to carry on. I was reluctant to stay scheduled for 3 hours and bore people to tears per se, and we didn't really know how many people would sign up. So let's just say I'm happy to carry on. There was a comment that we could have more than one meeting and a meeting per topic, and that's something we can look into in the new year. I won't schedule dates or anything at this point, but certainly willing to do so. When it comes to this zoning bylaw, we've done an immense amount of work. We know it's a priority for council. There's lots of support to get this done. But that said, there is no imminent decision or rush to deadline. We're trying to do this right, recognizing zoning bylaw 25 has been in place since the 1980s. And so whichever we end up with zoning bylaw 580, we can expect it to be in place for some number of years as well. So we want to make sure we put our best effort forward. So as I say, don't see any hands up at the moment. So why don't we go through, find some questions here. Here's one, and frankly, I'm surprised it hasn't come up yet, and I'm happy to answer it. Where is all the potable water coming from all the new developments on the drawing board? Our previous speaker noted a whole series of developments, and yes, those are all developments that we have in front of us. Some of them range from, say, Sunshine Coast Lions Housing Society, and the next building at Green Court range from imminently waiting on building permit application through to what's known as the Grand Excelsior development west of Wakefield Road, which is at a very, very early stage of consideration. So the water is looked at on a regional case. Of course, the Sunshine Coast Regional District supplies water. And there's efforts to expand the system. There's also efforts to reduce demand. The town of Gibsons has expanded their groundwater supply up into the Zone 2, which Zone 2 being the Upper Gibsons area, the Sunnycrest Mall, Chatleach High School, or pardon me, Elphinstone High School area was once serviced by Chapman Water. That's being transitioned to Gibsons Water. There's a well that's being drilled in Grantham's Landing, which has an abundance of water, and we're waiting on that to become approved by the province. So there are a number of initiatives underway that are meant to reduce our water deficit, and the regional district is making all kinds of plans and moving towards that. When we consider developments with every case, we consult with the regional district and we examine possibilities. So while there are a number of developments in front of us, we are certainly aware of this consideration. Now, previous speaker, W. Plimmer, is your hand up again or was it still up? Okay, well, let's move on.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
There you go. Can you hear
Okay,
us?
great, you're here. Okay.
Hi, I'm Heather Purvis. I don't do well on getting onto Zoom myself, so I'm sort of teaming up here.
Okay.
My comments are about short-term rentals, and no disrespect for all of the lovely people who have talked about the short-term rentals that they have at all, but I guess there's a lot of concern and talk about workers and people living here who have jobs or are trying to come for jobs and are having trouble finding accommodation. And I'm just thinking that with the boom of short-term rentals, that's using up a lot of space that could be rentals for people who need homes on the coast who are residents here. So I'm trying to just marry the two ideas and fix it for people who need homes when all these things are short term, and then they don't have places to live, where you know, short term sort of hotels, motels, not that it precludes some of these other lovely places, but it is using up space where people who are needing homes and can't find them could. And so I guess I'm also wondering, sort of a question is sort of what and how the whole concept of home-based short-term rentals sort of came about and kind of took off and bloomed to the extent that it has.
Yeah, that's an excellent
question. People, you know, residents and people who want to come and work and live here. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's an excellent question. It certainly has proliferated, and it's not, as I mentioned earlier, not specifically a Sechelt scenario. It's something that's proliferated across the world, really. But we recognize the need for housing, absolutely, be it rental housing, ownership housing, housing that locals can afford, attainable housing. There's a huge spectrum. We have worked collaboratively with the town of Gibsons and the regional district, and recently created what's called a housing needs report. It's mandated by the province, which is a new thing, but we've analyzed housing stock, availability, prices, incomes. We had professional consultants who are professionals in the housing study industry and really look at the whole Sunshine Coast and Sechelt and what are the issues. And of course, the price and the availability of housing is a huge concern for us. And short-term rental plays a role in that, no doubt. I think a lot of people have suites available but do not want to give them up on permanent rental and are available for short-term rental and or family use. But as we heard earlier, sometimes issues like building code and whatnot also are a barrier to full-time housing. So it's a real complex problem, absolutely. Oh, I see we have a hand up here from Mike.
Hi, sorry, I think my microphone was muted there. I trust you can hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
A bit quiet, but yes, we can.
Yeah, I don't really have any questions, but more just some comments. Speaking of, I'm a short-term rental operator in Sechelt, and I am quite familiar with the types of accommodation that are available for short-term rental, and I'd just like to say that a lot of these places that are rented for short-term rental aren't really the type of accommodation that's needed for long-term rental. And for myself, I have a waterfront place, and the rent, I did try renting it long-term and wasn't successful at it. The monthly rental price was a barrier there, and I did have groups that wanted to rent it. You know, groups of young people wanting to share the rental costs, and but I didn't think that was suitable for the neighborhood, and I had concerns over renting it like that. But I think there's, it's been well documented that already with some of the studies that have been done, that a lot of short-term rental operators are not interested in being landlords for various reasons. Probably one of the main ones would be they use the accommodation themselves for a few weeks of the year, or their family uses it as well. And a lot of these places are very high end. And I think the shortage in rental is more for low income earners, perhaps people that are working for minimum wage or a little better than that. And so what's needed is affordable long-term rental. And I think in the majority of cases, the short-term rentals that are on the market are high-end, and they're suitable for people wanting to an escape from Vancouver that can come up for a weekend and enjoy themselves. I'd also like to point out that you know, there seems to be a real variation in what's out there. Some of these places are like spas. Some are kind of a combination where, you know, if workers, temporary workers want to come to the community, which I've had several myself. I just recently had some cabinet installers working in the neighborhood that needed a driveway such as mine to park their vehicles and with the cabinets in there and house their workers. I've also had workers working on the post office last year, and some other recent ones working on a liquor store. So I think like these the short-term rentals also are not just accommodation for vacationers, they're also accommodation for the needs of temporary workers in the community there. And so I think that's important because that is servicing Sechelt and providing a need that Sechelt has for accommodation. And I'd just like to emphasize though that the need for rental accommodation, I think, is more for the lower end of the market, like affordable rental accommodation. And I get a little bit worried that people are thinking that the short-term rentals are taking away from that. I'm sure there is a small degree of that, but I think when you boil it down, you have a combination of operators not wanting to be long-term renters and just the accommodation not really being suitable for that lower end of the market.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that the point that you touched on, Mike, is the variety of uses for housing for the short term. It's not all holiday rentals. You know, there are construction rentals as well. I agree. I also agree absolutely that there's a real need for affordable rental units in Sechelt, 100%. And we've got some projects that look to fill some of that need. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay. Folks, Ian Hall, our development planning manager, will read out a question or two. I will be.
Okay, we have had quite a few questions on sort of enforcement issues, enforcement data, complaint data. We don't have the specifics handy available to us tonight, but we can definitely, something we would be reviewing as part of the zoning bylaw when we're looking at new regulations, certainly in relation to short-term rentals or any other use where we're considering new or different regulations. If we've been getting a lot of complaints and looking at new regulations and how that might address those complaint issues, whether it's you know, something that can be effectively resolved by new zoning regulations and or if it's something that is better served through a different bylaw, either dealing with the noise bylaw, if that needs to be updated, or if it's just a question of more enforcement of the noise bylaw, or looking at potential gaps in the zoning bylaw and seeking to improve regulations there that would enable better compliance and enforcement. But we can also look at providing some of that information on the types of complaints that we're getting and why, when we come to actually proposing new regulations and what we're attempting to resolve based on the complaints that we've been receiving. Let's go through here. There was another question. Is there any classification for small acreage farms with farm status in the district, i.e. properties outside of the ALR? It's definitely something we're looking at in terms of updating the rural zoning for properties outside the ALR, in addition to updating the zoning that applies to actual ALR properties, wanting to ensure that we're supporting agriculture in the rural areas, regardless of whether they're in or out of the ALR. And then also at the same time, exploring opportunities for urban agricultural regulations within the residential zones, so that we're providing more opportunities to support food security across the district, whether it's in the ALR lands, the rural non-ALR lands, or smaller scale opportunities on the residential properties. So, I mean, at the moment, there wouldn't necessarily be a specific agricultural focus zone for non-ALR properties, but we'd be looking at that through the rural zoning to support agricultural development in those properties as well. Somebody was seeking an update on the proposed large development at the bottom of Field Road in Wilson Creek. You're referring to the Evolve application that's still under review. Dealing with sewer servicing issues is probably one of the biggest issues there, but we have been working with the applicant on their revised zoning proposal. They propose some changes to a number of residential units and commercial floor areas, so we've been working with them on that piece. But probably the biggest issue there is sewer service. So that's still under review at this time. We've got, what support do you have in place for ALR properties now? And I think that's, from our perspective, why, one of the 5 key topics that we've acknowledged is the ALR zoning, or zoning of ALR properties, is that currently, as Andrew has mentioned, the RR2 zone that applies is a rural residential zone. It includes a lot of uses that are contrary to what's permitted under the provincial regulations. So it's really not in compliance with the provincial ALR regulations, and doesn't include a lot of the newer uses that have been allowed provincially based on all the updates that the province has done over the last 5 years. So that's what we're really looking to do with the new agricultural zone, is to have a proper agriculture zone that really is aligned with the provincial regulations and taking advantage of the opportunities that have been made available to ALR property owners, as well as really clarifying what is and is not permitted on those properties. The provincial regulations set out a number of uses that local governments have to permit. It sets out other uses that we can regulate to a certain degree, as well as other uses that we can regulate and or prohibit, irrespective of what the ALR or the ALC has allowed. So that's all things that we'll be exploring as part of that new agricultural zone to better support agriculture on the coast. And it's one of the key objectives of the agricultural area plan that the regional district adopted a few years ago, is looking both for zoning bylaws across the coast in Gibson, Sechelt, or the SCRD to update their agricultural zoning for both best practices to align with provincial regulations and really support the agricultural industry on the coast.
Shall we go back to ICW Plimmer has hand up again? Shall we go back for another question?
Sure.
Unmute. There.
Yes, please. It's Heather again. Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Hi, yes, it's Heather again. I just wanted to clarify the previous comment, again, with no offense intended, about the types of renters that there are, and understanding that, yes, there are a number of lower earning service workers who are trying to find accommodation and often have to band together in a group to be able to afford things. I've also heard that the hospital has trouble recruiting nurses and hospital staff because there's just nowhere for them to live, and RCMP members as well who come and need some rentals before they're prepared or as a time of their life when they are wanting to be homeowners. So just that there is a broad range of needed rentals and people needing rentals. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, folks, this is the part where it's difficult for me to say, how's everybody doing? Oh, great, other hands up. We're happy to carry on, provided that there's hands and questions coming in for, let's say, another 20 to 30 minutes. And if there's still questions, we'll check back then. Thank you. Okay, Terry.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I actually wrote in the question, but it's so far down the line that I just thought I would ask it. It's really a question about understanding the process, because last night I was puzzled as a resident here on Mills Road why the Westcourt developer appeared to completely ignore or dismiss the Advisory Planning Commission's concerns and recommendations, which are in the minutes made, in July, and instead it carried on, presented the exact same number of high density multifamily 44 units, which the chair, Paul Mears, had said, this is like, even though we all acknowledge, and everyone does, that affordable housing is needed in Sechelt, and there are many other areas besides Mills Road where this could happen. He said the particular proposal was like going from 0 to 100. And so I thought, gosh, with the feedback from the Advisory Planning Commission, there are specific concerns about too much traffic, with a traffic study being done and all of that. And that seemed to be, again, dismissed by Mr. Dunton. And I just was somewhat heartened in your response to Wayne Plimmer that in fact you will be sending a letter. But my question is, does it take an actual letter from the planning department, or does it take the direction of council to make or persuade or cause a developer to amend something that's just over the top and something that would really disrupt and arguably destroy the character of this neighborhood? All the neighbors were asking for was that it be something more reasonable, like it's just too much of an urban thing slammed in or infilled into a quiet neighborhood of single family homes that we came to, some of us have been here 20 years. So what is the process? Is it that he would have just said the exact same thing that was triggered our letter in June, the comments of the commission, And only until he hears from the planning department or council will he change the plan?
Well, all great questions, Terry. I'm going to put Sven Koberwitz, our development planner, on the spot here to answer that one.
Thank you, Andrew. Hi, Terry. Thank you for the question. And nice to talk to you again. I know we've talked about this development a number of times, but to just summarize the process that's taken place so far is essentially what we have is a developer who owns the land on Mills Road and has made a development proposal that he thinks is the one to go present to the community. We initially presented a report to council to request permission to proceed with this application, to essentially to start work with some form of a public process to determine if this scale and density of development can be supported. So this is an ongoing process, and as you noted last night, the developer had a public information meeting, and this is something that's really our staff doesn't involve themselves a lot in, other than that it's a requirement in our bylaws that the developer undertake some engagement with the surrounding neighborhood to inform them of what they're planning. Now, obviously, this generates a significant amount of feedback that staff will consider, that council will consider down the road as well, and that includes the comments that were made by the APC. But ultimately, it's a developer's own discretion of whether they take APC comments to heart, or whether they take staff comments to heart, and the public as well. So the development application will go back to council, and it's council that will ultimately have to interpret all the comments that have been received to date and decide whether the application should continue in the way that it's been presented, or whether alterations are required potentially to implement some of the recommendations that the advisory council or the advisory planning commission made. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Sven.
Oops. It looks like you just muted yourself again, Terry, if you were talking.
I just wanted to thank Sven for that explanation, and I'm more clear. Last night I noted that it was Mayor Seegers who said she had in fact been the first in line of a few people that had suggested that this be a multi-family high density area. So it's going to be interesting to see what council will decide to do once it comes back to council.
Yeah, I think they're manufacturing dissent.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just update, we continue to answer questions in the Q&A best we can. We will be making record of the question and answer, post those onto our webpage so that people can see that at a later date. I will remind you again, planning@sechelt.ca. If you leave this session with lingering thoughts and questions, please do feel free to reach out to us. We review this. We do answer, we do categorize and save them for future use and so forth. So we value your input and keen to hear what you have to say on these variety of these topics. Okay. So there's a question here, what is our timeline for short-term rentals? I'll answer that respecting broadly the zoning bylaw. So what we're doing now, we've been doing survey work, conversations, engagement meetings, and so forth. We'd like to present a summary of our engagement to council early in 2021 and move on with writing the bylaw. But writing the bylaw doesn't mean it's finished. It just means we now have something formal we can share with council, the community associations. We do have a goal to complete in 2021. And so we are moving forward, but I will say we're not moving forward in a hasty fashion where we're trying to methodically move our way through, make the right decisions, honor public engagement and so forth. There was a question about whether or not, going back to my questions here, whether or not we collect the municipal tax. There's a hotel tax is the casual name for Airbnbs, and it's collected by Sunshine Coast Tourism. And any provincial sales tax that may be collected goes to the province. Well, I see our attendance has dropped about 20% in the last 5 minutes. Folks, if you're there on the attendee list and you feel inclined to put up your hand, please do so in the next couple of minutes with an eye for potentially wrapping this up. But if there are more questions, by all means, please do raise your hand. Okay, hello, Greg has a question. We'll bring him in.
Hello again.
Hi, Greg.
Has there been any consideration given to the idea of handling short-term rentals differently depending on the area? It would seem like a waterfront usage would be different than a large lot ALR, and that a downtown Sechelt might be different than something up Wilson Creek. Has there been any thought given to different ways of approaching both sort of the locations as well as perhaps just the general size of the property? So if you're trying to, if the behavior of party houses is a concern, it seems like it would be better to target some regulations at 10-room, 6,000 square foot residences versus 200 square foot tiny homes.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point. I mean, it's something we can look into. We have not specifically planned for that to date. And we kind of look at a number of rooms. We bandied around the idea of a minor and a major short-term rental, and that could be appointed towards property size or potentially even location. But it's an interesting idea, absolutely. It's something we'll take note of and discuss amongst our team here.
It seems to me as if a lot of the problems here are party house driven.
Yeah.
And
it would seem to be, yeah.
Being the case, you know, I think a lot of the short-term operators like us feel a little swept up in a problem that we're not involved in, and are afraid, of course, that it has a major impact on, you know, in our investments and use of the property and how we choose to use property in Sechelt. So it does seem like targeting is important here. You know, you don't want to sweep up and you know, somebody who bought a property here to be able to afford it based on a given income structure might not be able to do that, but this problem may have nothing to do with where they are or how they've behaved.
Interesting point. I mean, I think our frustration with party houses, I think, is the ability, or let's say inability, to enforce based on behavior, right? So we need to have some land use metrics that we can rely upon, be it property size, bedroom amounts, etc. Right? So it's something that we admittedly can do some more research and thinking about, and open to suggestions if you wanted to follow up by email with us as well.
Certainly. No, thank you. Since I will have to jump off, thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you, Greg.
Really appreciate it.
Okay. Well, folks, I want to sincerely thank everybody who attended tonight. We had a number of questions in our Q&A. As I say, we were writing feverishly, trying to keep up. Thank you for everybody who asked a question. And even if you didn't ask a question, that's fine. We appreciate you being here. Very pleased to see, I think at the high point, there were 57 folks in attendance, and that's excellent. Again, email us, planning@sechelt.ca. You could simplify and create a subject header that relates to the zoning bylaw, where we're building a list that we can use to update folks as to our progress and so forth. So with that, I will suggest final call for hands up. We have a hand. Donna Patrick.
Yes, hi. I was wondering, when you were talking about the housing needs report, is that available online, or when do you expect that to be available?
Yes, it's available online, you bet. It's on our website, Town of Gibson's website as well. So happy to share that link. I can.
Is that report just for Gibson's, or is it for the whole Sunshine Coast?
No, it's for the whole Sunshine Coast. We had an opportunity to partner together, and the Town of Gibson's offered to take the lead. And the reason why, one of the great reasons of partnering together is we were eligible for more funding from the province if we work together. Of course, we all want to collaboratively share this issue up and down the coast. So Town of Gibson's did lead it, but District of Sechelt was very much involved every step of the way. And the consultants were able to narrow the data down to reflect both the regional approach as well as the needs and of each of the jurisdictions, including the electoral areas of the regional district.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, folks, with that, I will thank you once again for attending. Have a safe Christmas holiday season, and we look forward to doing another one of these in the new year. Thank you.